Good morning, everyone. I'm very excited to be here. This is my first time actually attending one of these grade rep meetings, so I'm delighted to be here. Before I begin, I thought it might be an idea to share a little bit about my role and certainly how the students get connected with me for those of you who may not be familiar. So I do have the privilege, of course, of speaking to your daughters about all things school, friends, relationships, mental health, and certainly beyond that. And in my role, I provide a safe and confidential space for students to express openly how they're feeling, and then to gain some strategies or tips for how to work through that. And that's done through some short-term counseling. I also help students to get connected with outside supports should they need more ongoing help. And in that way, I would connect with families and help them figure out some referrals or resources to initiate that. Students are referred to me through their guidance counselors. I also get referrals through teachers who may notice changes in a student who also reach out that way. And then I also have some students who self-refer. So sometimes word of mouth, I've helped a friend, and so therefore they may want to connect with me that way. So there's a few different ways in which students are able to connect. There's also different avenues where students learn a little bit about my role. For grade 7 and grade 8, I am introduced in the first few weeks of school in their guidance classes. So I actually attend their classes and I do an introductory session on what it means to be a social worker, and then some strategies around well-being for the year. And then I'm often invited back for other sessions later on related to self-care, coping with anxiety, stress around assessments or exam taking, or anything really well-being or mental health related that I may be able to shed some light on. Throughout the year, I also am involved in other different avenues where students do get connected with me. So another place is through being a house advisor. So I am the house advisor for Margaret Taylor House. And then I'm also a staff mentor for a few different student groups, including our LGBTQ plus Brave Space, our Gender Sexuality Alliance group, our jock.org, which is a mental health group, as well as the Middle School Wellbeing Club. So students do have an opportunity to, get familiar with me, and through those groups, I often get referrals as well. Not being a teacher or a parent to them, I think I'm in a unique position where students often feel, I think, comfortable opening up about their fears, their worries, struggles, both academic, so based in school issues, and certainly beyond that. And from those conversations, I learn a lot about them. And in my best efforts to support them, I do think it's important to share what I've learned from them with our guidance team, with our teachers, and certainly in avenues like this with our parents, so that together we may be able to all support our students a lot better. I think this pandemic and subsequently remote learning, as I imagine you're all aware, has certainly had an impact on our students, on our families, our community, and our world at large. I think it's safe to say that we are all glad to see the back of 2020. I know I am. But even as the new year brings about brighter, more hopeful days, kids and parents alike are still grappling with the stress, anxiety, grief, and emotional fatigue that this pandemic has brought. And I think the chronic stress of living through this uncertainty of the pandemic can absolutely lead to a host of different mental health struggles, including stress-related fatigue, which over time you may be noticing in yourselves and in your children is leading to a lack of energy, lack of motivation, and certainly difficulty in concentrating. So perhaps one of the most difficult things to deal with is that we can't know sort of what the future brings. And there's a lot that we are unable to predict or to plan for or to change. But there are things certainly that we can be doing right now. And that is going to be the focus of the next few slides, is that I'm going to be sharing some strategies for how we can support our young people right now, some practical tips that may or may not already be things that you're doing. And if they are, hopefully this is just a good reminder. So the first slide, thank you, I have on there, and this is intentional, actually, to put this as the first point, is around really the relationship that you have with that young person in your life. Right now, sadness is a very normal feeling to have. Many people are feeling isolated from friends, missing their normal routines, and quite frankly, worrying about whether or not things are ever going to go back to normal. And while it's hard to be away from their good friends, many teens are trying to fill that void using social media or video calls to try to connect with them. But the part that they are missing and that they're not able to replicate really in the same way is that passive socialization that happens when they're at school. So walking through the halls and having those one-off conversations, or something funny may have happened in a class and they're able to all sort of take in that moment. Those are the experiences that they're not able to really replicate right now. So it is totally understandable that sadness and disappointment are a regular sort of emotion that they're feeling right now. And given that this is a real feeling, it's important that we do acknowledge and validate that. And that, for a young person, can go a long way in helping them to feel seen, to feel heard, and really understood. As parents, a way of doing that can be to visualize for yourself that you are in your daughter's shoes and to try to listen openly. And as tempting as it may be to jump in with advice or with solutions because we want so very much to help them, instead it can actually be more helpful to say things like, in what ways can I be there for you right now? Or, oh, that sounds really, really tough. What do you need from me right now? So using it as an opportunity to acknowledge that that feeling exists for them, that it is real, that you see that pain, that you see that struggle, and then asking permission or asking certainly what ways you can be there to help them through that, as opposed to just directly giving a solution or advice. In order to validate these feelings, though, of course, that means you need to have conversation and you need to know a little bit about what's going on, which I know can be hard to do if your young person doesn't open up very easily. Teens are obviously very reluctant to share a lot of personal things, especially with parents. So a word of warning, be prepared for pushback if you haven't already experienced that, and know that that is, entirely normal as well. One thing that can help, though, in having that conversation is choosing the right time to have that conversation. So it probably won't be effective to have this heart-to-heart conversation when they're in the middle of doing something really fun with their friends online, or if they're distracted with something, or if you've just had, an argument or a disagreement. Those are probably not good times to engage in this kind of conversation. But instead, you may want to try asking things like, hey, do you want to go for a walk? Or let's spend some time together, you and I, and let's check in. So, you're using opportunities where maybe you're getting out of the house, or maybe times right before bed where it's calmer, quieter. Hopefully you're in a better mood and they're in a better mood, and you're able to really engage in more of that heartfelt kind of conversation. It's more likely that they're going to hear the things that you have to say. And it's also more likely on your end that you're going to be open to receiving some of that information that they're going to share. The next slide I have is around self-care. If you can switch to the next slide. And that, perfect, thank you. And just as important as it is, I think, to encourage regular self-care for our students, our daughters, it's also equally important that you as parents are also checking in with yourself and engaging in regular practice of self-care activities. As parents, being aware of your own needs and investing time in certainly taking care of yourself will also ensure that not only you feel better, but that you also have that emotional bandwidth to take on some of the stress and the drama and those other areas that your students are going to bring forth. So to make sure that you have the capacity to also be able to handle that. So this one is directly, certainly directed towards our parent community, but also just a reminder, a reminder that I give the students all the time is that self-care is not about being selfish. It's a very necessary component of our well-being. And if we want to help our students or help our daughters, it's really important that we make sure that we have a full tank as well. So it's important that we are also looking after ourselves. The next slide, set a regular sleep schedule or routine. Since there's no need for a commute to school, classes are also starting a little later. And for some older students, I know they may have first period spares. We're noticing that many teens are finding themselves staying up later and sleeping in. So these routines that they would normally be in if they were at school are certainly not happening in the same ways, which is having a direct impact on, of course, their sleep, and then in turn on their motivation and their energy towards school. So one of the things that can be helpful, which I will be the first to acknowledge is certainly a challenge, is trying to set a regular, bedtime and a regular sleep routine. But in these ways, it can be helpful to have a bit of structure at home and to be open about having these conversations about how important it is that they do get a good night's sleep to be able to feel rejuvenated and rested for the next day. So setting a regular sleep time routine, that's what I'm emphasizing here. And that could be as simple as just having a regular bedtime and being, realistic about that. If your kid goes to bed at 1 o'clock every night, we're not going to set the bedtime routine to 10 o'clock. That might not be realistic, but could we bring that bedtime down to midnight, or could we bring it to 12:30? So some of it is a bit of negotiating with that young person, but also it could be setting limits on how much screen time they have. So if they're on their phone, or perhaps negotiating removing the phone out of the room and being somewhere where they don't have access to it during their sleep time. And really the sole purpose of that, to be quite clear, is to actually just create some mental space between their schoolwork, their social life, and anything really stress inducing while they're in their bedroom, and particularly while they're in their bed, because we know that those are things that are going to actually prevent them from sleeping well. The next slide. Encourage social connection. So as you're all aware, attending school remotely is certainly an adjustment. And connecting with peers and friends at school is something really vital to your teen's development, and something that they're not able to do in the same way right now. So the virtual learning environment in comparison can be certainly quite isolating. So it is important to help them to find creative ways of helping them to stay engaged socially, and particularly with their friends. So you might talk to your teens around what methods of connecting with friends is best for them. And this might be beyond just, texting or going on social media. It could actually be maybe you're joining a virtual program online. So maybe either signing up for a yoga class with a few of their friends, or a boot camp class, or something where they're able to engage in something a little bit different that gets out of just connecting through those other social media sort of avenues. But encouraging that as well, that you understand the importance and the need for them to continue to maintain that social connection. And it's difficult because we can't have that physical connection, but the social one we certainly want to keep encouraging. And just sort of a word of warning around this is going to mean that they're going to be spending more time online and more time on phones and on computers. And I think that's something that we might need to be a little flexible on. We're certainly not encouraging that at nighttime, and I'm actually going to go into that over the next slide, but certainly we need to make sure that they are still engaging in those ways and how important that is. The next one, thank you, set limits on screen time. So that one really is around encouraging frequent breaks from the computer and other devices. Now, this is certainly hard to do when they're at school remotely all day and sitting in front of the computer, but it could mean after every class, getting up, going to grab a glass of water, a snack, stretching, physically getting out of their room or the space in which they're doing their work, changing their environment a little bit, and just taking that brief pause from directly being online and on a screen. It's also minimizing the amount of devices also that they're using. So if they're on their computer, it's also not holding my phone and checking social media or playing a game while I'm also on my computer, paying attention in class. That's obviously a little bit harder to monitor, but we want to make sure that they're not being overstimulated and overstressed by also having too many devices on at the same time. The point about the excess screen time, what I'm referring to here is the screen time after school. So when school is finished and they have now this downtime, it's tempting for them to go back on the screen or to go back on their computer. They're trying to find an outlet. So yes, we need to be flexible about some time where they're able to do that, but it's also particularly that we need to be more, encouraging around nighttime, that they're not doing that late into the night. And there's tons of research that supports that the blue light from our screens are actually suppressing the production of melatonin, which we know is the helpful hormone to help us sleep. So if this is happening, like they're on their screens later on the evening, they're actually preventing themselves from having, like I said, that restful sleep, which we know is so vital actually to their development and for their energy, concentration, and academic performance the next day. Next slide. Encourage physical activity. Physical activity, because our students are not certainly engaging in all of those extracurricular activities in the same way. While they are available, they may not be happening in the exact same way that's allowing them to really engage as physically as possible. So one of the things that might be helpful here is to encourage that to happen. And it could be simply inviting, your family members or having a nightly walk with the family, and, encouraging your young person to go for a walk. Sometimes it can be alone, if that's appropriate for their age and certainly your comfort, but, making sure that they are getting out and moving their body in some capacity. And another great way, and certainly one way I have found helpful, can be to join one of these online communities or classes, and to do that with friends, to have a weekly class that you attend from the comfort of your home that is allowing you to get physically active. So really making sure that that is something that's an important part of the routine as well is going to be helpful. And the last slide I have here is really a reminder to reach out for help if needed. So what I'm trying to say here is that it's important to look for signs in your young person that they may need more support. If your teenager is feeling really irritable and down, it does not necessarily mean that they need to seek support from a mental health professional right away. We do know that some of these feelings are very normal and common, and particularly common during this time. But it is important that we be able to see them snap out of these experiences. So if after a particularly stressful time, they're coping better and they're out of that, that's a good sign. If they've had a few rough days, but then they've had some highs where things are going well, that's a great sign. What we're looking for is when that stage of sadness, irritability, or anything really uncharacteristic of this person that of this young person, is occurring over a prolonged period of time and is not necessarily changing, that's really a sign to us that we may need to seek extra support. And those individuals that you can turn to as a first point of contact would be the family doctor, would also be a mental health professional that you may or may not be connected with or familiar with, but you can also get referrals from your family doctor. And then you can also reach out to the guidance counselor, and as well as to myself for any resources or referrals that way. And we'd be happy to shed some light on some places that you may want to consider. But it's really to not chalk everything up to it's just the pandemic, but being mindful that there are some things certainly that we're going to notice more, which is like the isolation, spending more time in their room, not wanting to do very much. We're going to certainly see that, but are there going to be opportunities for them to get through that? Are they coping through that? That's really what we're looking for. And if they're not, over a period of time, that's where we may need to take that extra step. In closing, I just thought I would add in something hopeful, because I know hearing all this sometimes can feel like, wow, there's a lot of negative stuff going on. But I think a good reminder to all of us, and something I remind myself, is that we've been in this pandemic almost a year now, if we're looking back at last March, and our students have made it this far. And that is a real testament, I think, to their strength, their resilience, and certainly the great support they have around them, both at home and both at school. And put simply, I feel like I just wanted to put that out there, that they're going to be okay and they're going to get through this. And for anyone who is unsure about how to continue to manage what's happening, as I've mentioned, there is no harm in reaching out and connecting with professional support to check in around that. But they are doing okay, and they will continue to push through this, just as I think we all will. Thank you. And that's it for me.
Caitlin, this
Yeah.
was truly a fabulous section of our meeting. Thank you so much for this. I mean, it is definitely strange times and challenging times for everyone. We do have a question here, if I may bring it to you. It says, how many hours of sleep is enough, do you think, and suggest for our senior girls?
Perfect. Thank you for that. I didn't see that before. Recommended amount of sleep is based on age. So if you're talking about an older student, what we're referring to is around 6 to 9 hours, depending on, certainly everyone's different, but that is usually the recommended amount. I know from speaking to most students, I don't think they even get 6 hours, unfortunately. But people do function on different levels, but we are hoping that they get at the bare minimum between that amount of time. And that's to really maximize, as I mentioned, that they are being able to feel fully rested and rejuvenated. There's a lot of great work that happens obviously as we sleep and when they get into that deeper sleep. So really making sure that sleep, if anything, is something that is highly encouraged and structured. But to be honest, it does take time to get into a bit of a routine. So having these conversations now can be helpful when things are just starting. So we're just starting a second semester. They may be relatively not as stressed as they will be later on. So beginning these sort of routines now can be a good way to start.
Okay, thank you. Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us and giving us guidance and tips.
No problem.